Morning, everyone. It seems that our EBnet tech team outdid themselves after their last Rocky video. So well done to them. That was quite the opening video. I can see some of you have already posted your comments around how much that was enjoyable. Today, we are here to discuss a very serious topic, despite the comical intro. But let's start with our welcome for today. Welcome to the EBnet community who has joined us. We have had a lot of interest in this webinar, and we're looking forward to the conversation that we are going to have this morning. But welcome specifically to all our trustees, management committees, our advisors, both retail and institutional who are on the line, I'm enjoying the laughs on the side there. Both investment and human resource professionals or human capital professionals. We do have some regulators on the line and the press. To a lesser or greater extent, today's topic affects us all. And so today we will be having a very interactive conversation around Joint Standard 2 of 2024 on cybersecurity and cyber resilience. But before we get there, let's deal with some of the housekeeping issues. I can see many of you have already found the chat functionality on the right-hand side of your screen. Please be sure to post your questions there. We will be monitoring that and answering those that do pop up where we are able to. Also, to just manage your timing for the morning, we do need for the session to run for 65 minutes to meet the requirements of our verification body for CPD hours. So we can expect to finish at around 10:05 this morning, or 10:10, depending on the questions and the interactions. And speaking of CPD hours, we will be contacting you to arrange those CPD hours after the session. So you don't need to worry about that. You will be hearing from us for those of you who are looking for the verified CPD hour for today. Okay, today is a serious topic and needs and is an important conversation that we need to talk about given the requirements of Joint Standard 2 of 2024. This Joint Standard becomes effective on the 1st of June, and to help us unpack the different perspectives that this standard can be seen from, we've got a panel of 4 this morning. We've got Fergus McCloskey, who's the Chief Technology Officer at MIP, who are our sponsors for this morning's event as well. So thank you to them for that. We have Radesh Maharaj, who is a director and shareholder of Soonder Incorporated and has specifically asked me not to mention that he is a cyber security expert. We have Dr. Almarie Bierman, who is the director and founder of the Cybersecurity Institute. And last but definitely not least, we have Siphamandla Buthelezi, or as we call him, SPA affectionately, who is the head of platforms at NMG Benefits. While they're coming on the stage, we're just going to play a quick short video from our sponsors of today's event, MIP.
MIP is a leading global fintech that provides world-class technology solutions and software services to the umbrella of industries that exist within financial services, more specifically healthcare, risk and insurance, employee benefits, wealth management and lending. Our technology, through our engagement platform and policy administration system, touches the lives of 24 million beneficiaries on a daily basis, and we have earned the recognition of Gartner as one of the most well-adopted policy administration technologies across Europe, Middle East and Africa. Our system was first developed in 1993 and has since been through countless rewrites and iterations to evolve into the mature, yet innovative solution we have today. The key features and capabilities embedded in our platform are informed by our 30 years of experience, emerging user needs, client requests, key trends and cutting-edge research and innovation. In partnering with MIP, you don't just buy yourself access to our system, you are harnessing our 30 years of experience.
Welcome onto the stage, everyone. The IT, cyber, and data conversation is not new to our industry. We all remember the scramble for POPIA compliance on the 1st of July 2021, and then Joint Standard 1 of 2023, which deals with IT governance and risk management. But I will be honest, this time around it feels different. The requirements seem more onerous, and it seems that there are far more perspectives involved in this one. We've got the trustees on the one hand, and the fund together with the trustees. And on the other hand, we have all the fund's service providers. And each of those come to this discussion with a different perspective, and joint standard applies to each of those in varying degrees. We're going to talk about that today. Add to that the complexity or the number of interactions which have now increased due to two-pot, and the value of assets that retirement funds manage, and we've got fertile ground for bad actors. So we're going to chat about these things today. I see that there are already some questions which we will deal with during the session. But before we get started, Radesh, let's start with you. Perhaps you could summarize the highlights or the main points of this Joint Standard 2 of 2024.
Good morning, Natalie, and good morning to my fellow panelists, as well as the almost 300 people who have joined us for this morning's session. I think firstly, what this tells us is there's definitely a great interest, Natalie, with regards to JS2 of 2024. And that interest is definitely warranted, firstly, because of the nature of the business we as retirement funds, as trustees, as principal officers, as management involved in the daily operations of retirement funds in this country and their various service providers have, if we're honest with ourselves, fallen a little behind other jurisdictions. And this can be ascertained not only from EU and UK similar sort regulation on cybersecurity and cyber resilience, but also if you look at the footnotes in Joint Standard 2, some of the definitions, etc., are said to be adopted from Financial Stability Board guidelines, etc., stemming some 7-8 years ago. So this gives a general indication of the necessity for this joint standard. And you know, we ask, or should be asking ourselves, basic questions. We've moved away from the receiving of faxes, as example, as ways to do business. We've moved away from the post room and clerks delivering our letters to our desks and putting it in our inbox and taking out from our outbox, etc. We've moved away from that. What have we moved to? We've moved to this cyber world, this IT-heavy world, for a very good reason. We want, in the nature of business, that things be done as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. As you and ICTS, Natalie, have arranged this webinar today with almost 300 people attending it, and none of us having to be in one place. Doing business transactions, investment transactions, etc., has improved dramatically. What does this do? You remember 15, 20 years ago, pension fund members used to have their their returns declared on an interim and final basis every 12 months. Then some went down to 3 months, then to 1 month. Now, most of our funds do it on a daily basis, right? That's the nature of business. That's what we want. And in order to effect these things, we have used these great IT systems, etc. The downside of that is that just as in the past, people may have forged letters, etc., signatures and the rest of it, sent it to banks. What do we have now? We have interceptions of emails, of authorized persons who can instruct movement of investments, movements of monies in funds. All of those things need to be controlled. And to our credit, many of the financial institutions that are subject to this Joint Standard 2 of 2024 have already implemented quite robust systems, etc. I'll be honest with you, with regards to retirement funds, we have not done it. And retirement fund administrators, if they are honest as well, whilst maybe at a bit higher level than retirement funds, they also have a way to go. So this Joint Standard 2 of 2024 is meant to address the minimum requirements that financial institutions, as defined in the Joint Standard, not as defined in the Financial Sector Regulation Act, please take note of that, need to implement. And that implementation is at least at 3 levels. The first level, as usual, is the policy level for each fund. That the governing body of the financial institution, in our case for retirement funds, etc., it's the board of management and its trustees, must set a cyber or put in place a cyber plan comprising its strategy, its framework, policies, etc., the responsible persons and the rest of it. Written document we used to drafting these plans, etc. What we're not used to is following those policies and frameworks and plans. The only time some trustees and management boards wake up to it is when FSRA comes to visit them or sends them a letter to say, give me your policies. Then the next step is, tell me how you did this. You tell them. And then the next letter becomes a query letter where they say, before we penalize you, your policy says this, but we see you do that. Kindly explain deviation. What we're not good at is implementing plans and ensuring those plans remain properly policed, oversight is exercised, etc. And who's responsible for that? The oversight of these things? The boards of management of our funds. So
Thank you.
So not only do we, as boards, etc., have to establish and implement these frameworks, but we have to ensure on a regular basis that these policies, etc., are actually adhered to. Then what do we have? We need to regularly ensure that these policies on cybersecurity, cyber resilience are up to date and at least on an annual basis actually are reviewed. Then the next level is, if as these things are practical things, we need to have independent audits of those systems. And we need experts at again, the joint standard uses some interesting words such as penetration testing and vulnerability assessments, etc., that need to be done. As trustees, etc., let's be honest with ourselves. We have no idea how to do those things. That is why service providers, independent, good ones, need to be hired, and not ones who will say, yes, everything is fine because I want my fee. Rather, that they actually do that job properly and report to board so that the board can then satisfy itself as to what steps to take. Lastly, there needs to be testing, at least there needs to be training of board, of users of IT systems, etc., that needs to take place. And I'm going to stop now, Natalie, But what also needs to be done is, if there are any cyber incidents, they must be properly reported, and the authorities need to be informed of it so they can decide how to take these things forward. I'll stop there. There's much more I can talk about, but let me stop for now.
Thank you. So to summarize, we need frameworks, we need policies, we need service providers who have a different perspective to this conversation, we need training, and we need monitoring. Elmarie, I'm going to look at you next and address Zanele's question that she's asked in the chat. And she's asked, where does a fund start to comply? And from my perspective, what does compliance and best practice look like?
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. To me, the standard is about risk management. Okay, so you need to put in place a risk management framework, and how are you going to manage and govern that? So that risk management framework is about understanding and being able to identify and to assess your risks, and then put in controls. Okay, so when Radesh mentioned the policies, that is exactly that. A policy is part of your control systems. But why do you have a policy? Because there is a risk associated, and you need to adhere to that. You need to mitigate that risk. So in terms of when do you comply? So if I'm from an auditor's perspective go into, is to see, okay, but what has been put in place in terms of this governance framework, in terms of, but how do you manage your risks, and how do you identify that risk, and are you able then, okay, now I have this 300 risks, what do you do in terms of mitigating that? What do you have a risk framework? So we don't, I think I want to just not, people are sort of, this is first a grudge thing because they have to do it. But if we go and look at, and Radesh mentioned this whole evolution of how we do business, but the evolution of cybercrime, we also have to look at. If we just look in the last 2 weeks, what happened in Australia in terms of their pension funds and how much money was lost there. The same in the Netherlands, the same in California, if we just go back in the past year. And what is happening there is that governance structures may have been in place, but they target the service provider because we didn't look at, but where is my risks associated with the service providers? And the pension funds, that's a big thing because, they just have maybe this one computer, this board of trustees, and the rest is a supply chain, is among the service providers. But how, from a pension fund point of view, do we identify those risks, and what do we put in place to manage that? That is the basis of the standard. Forget about the pen testing and the vulnerability monitoring. That is part of your controls, and your controls will only be applicable if you have identified an associated risk. I don't know whether I've answered the question.
There's another question from Nick that has been highlighted, and that is, does everything need to be done by the 1st of June?
I would, I would think that we tend to think that security is an endpoint. That if we are going to put X, Y, and Z in place, then it's done, and we never do that again. But I'm sorry to burst your bubble. This is going to be part of your life for forever because it's not going to go away. Security is about putting that risk management framework in place because it's a continuous thing. So in terms of complying, I just want to mention one thing, as we normally say, hope is not a strategy, first of all, so you need to have a cybersecurity strategy in place, and hope is not one of them. And compliance is not a security. So there's two different things. Am I compliant to the standard? In other words, do I have this governance framework in place? And secondly, are my systems secure? In other words, now do I go and implement that framework? As Radesh said, or is it just a policy that is, it's somewhere there, pen and paper in some file? So they will come and say, okay, but the 1st of June, you must have that governance framework in place. Are you going to be mature or resilient 100%? No. No, unfortunately not. You're not going to be. But you have to show that you are implementing that and that you are in the process of managing your risks.
I do see, Nick, the kind of elaborative comment he's made on his question is, do we have 12 months or a year in which to become compliant? Nick, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you certainly want your frameworks and your policies in place by the 1st of June. I see Fergus has gone missing. We are trying to get him back. But while we're waiting for that SPA, I wonder if you could maybe talk about, from a practical administrator's perspective, how reasonable are these requirements? Is NMG there yet? Is the industry there yet? And if not, how long do you think it will take before we reach compliance with Joint Standard 2?
Thank you, Natalie. I think that's a very good question. In terms of the requirements, are they reasonable? I think, in my view, that they're quite reasonable, and I will tell you why. So if you think about this in the context of the growing global emphasis on cybersecurity and data protection, then you can actually see that these requirements are reasonable. However, they do pose significant challenges depending on the institution's current systems, the nature of their business, as well as the resources that they have. So as much as they're reasonable, but they will pose challenges to some of the players. I would like to touch on just 4 reasons why I think that they are reasonable in my view. One being the global trend towards a strong cybersecurity. So you would have known that the most developed countries have actually much better resources in terms of trying to avoid cyber attacks and what they put in place in terms of the prevention side of that, right? So what these requirements does for South Africa is that they are just trying to align us with the rest of the world. So I think that's reasonable in my mind. The second one is also just trying to align us with the best practices that are already there, that are put out in the world. So if we are not aligned in terms of us applying the best practices, it means that we are more vulnerable than the countries actually that have put those in place. So it's important for us as a country to be put very close to that. And also just it helps us fighting these cybersecurity issues as a one view instead of different countries and different people doing different things. The third one for me, which I think is the most important one, is the one that focuses on resilience. So you would have seen that these requirements does not only talk about how to prevent attacks, but they've got a huge emphasis on resilience. So how do you focus on resilience, making sure that your systems can recover quickly in the case of an attack? Most people in the financial industry, they will tell you that the cyber attack, it's not a matter of if it will happen, it's a matter of when will it happen. So how do you recover? It's very important to know how do you recover. Dr. Almarie touched on what happened in Australia. And the question was not whether it's going to happen or not. It's how well do they recover after it happened. It's important that we actually prepare for that. So these requirements put us very close in that. And I think the last one, which is the most important one for me, is just like this clear governance and oversight. Gone are the days whereby the governance and the oversight of cybersecurity and the protection of members' data is put in the hands of IT. It's not an IT requirement. So mandating boards and senior management to actually have an oversight on cybersecurity is not an unreasonable ask. There will definitely be challenges, yes. I mean, we can talk about different challenges ranging from resource intensive for smaller administrators and for smaller funds, or in fact for even smaller firms that are required to comply. We can talk about the complexity of implementation. We can talk about the short time in terms of the time frames that have been given to us, and the ongoing maintenance, to Radesh's point, around this, including the audit that will have to take place once this is done. All of those are challenges that we'll have to face with, but the requirement on its own, they're very reasonable. And I think we need them as a country, we need them as a financial institution. Yes, there will be challenges. Are we there yet? I think as a country, I wouldn't say we are there yet confidently. I think that some financial institutions are much readier than the others, depending on the complexity of their operations, their resources, depending on their existing systems. Some people have been attacked before, and which pushed them way before this to actually strengthen their resources and their systems. So some people will get there much quicker than others, and while some others will take place. But I think just having these requirements and having these legislated, it does push everyone to be in a better position. So if you ask me, come 1 June, we will be in a much better position than we've ever been before, because at very least people will have assessed their systems. They know what the gaps that they have, they know what needs to be done, and they will have put in place the project plans around how they're going to cover those. So we're not there yet fully, but this has put us in a much better position than we've ever been before.
Thank you. Thanks. That's such a great answer, and it leads into our next question now that Fergus is back. I'm glad to see that the CTO has a stable technology going on there. But Fergus, seriously, from a systems design perspective, I can't believe that we don't already have built-in security measures when it comes to admin systems and systems in general. So how much of Joint Standard 2 is new? And what has MIP been doing to support compliance with Joint Standard 2?
Hi, Natalie, and hi, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity, and I apologize for the button click that was bad. So what MIP has done in order to make sure that their clients are geared for this joint standard, and we actually encourage this joint standard. It's something that we feel has been quite understated over the years, and the implementation of it reinforces what we've been doing for many years. 30 years, 450 software developers. It's very difficult to manage a group of people on that basis. But in terms of our systems and our readiness to do stuff, I think what we call is baked-in security. Security and cyber resilience and everything has to be baked into what you do on a daily basis. So the systems and the applications that you may design have to have security as the base thought, and then you work from there. It's very difficult to retrofit security elements into systems. Now, whether that be from software or whether that be from infrastructure, your infrastructure has to be secure by design, whether it's on-premise or whether it's in the cloud. In the cloud means nothing. It doesn't mean that you are cyber secure. You've still got to build resilience. You've got to build authentication. You have to build all the security design features around it. So that's what we do on a daily basis. And what we do is we build a framework that our 450 software engineers are able to leverage to build, develop, and deploy customized solutions to our user community. Now, are the requirements the same across our client base? We have varying degrees of small, medium, large, and mega-sized clients, and they have varying degrees of security requirements and security regimes, where audit, risk management, etc. And that's what we configure our systems to support those types of features that they require. So in terms of your answer, have we needed to build anything specifically for this joint standard? No. All we've had to do is make sure that our clients are adopting them and that they've been audited, they've been tested, and they've been run through several times. The soft feature is the people feature all the time. We bypass it because we people. We don't like configuring things that restrain us. So yes, from our perspective, we've made no changes. We've simply configured better and tighter all the time.
Great assurance, thank you. And speaking of assurances, for those of you who perhaps didn't catch, we dropped an FAQs document and a checklist in the handouts. So feel free to download those while we're talking. And some of the questions which are appearing in the chat bar are actually in that FAQs document for you. While you're there, we're gonna wake you up and post our first poll, which really is around, do you believe your fund will be ready by the 1st of June 2025? And while people are answering that, and Fergus, back to you, and perhaps you've answered this already in your first answer, but from a systems perspective, do you think we'll be ready?
Natalie, I think we're going to be ready, but I think it's not a binary yes or no, 0 or 1. I think it's a process. I think we've got to have gone through the process. We need to have looked at the joint standard, and it is comprehensive. It really is one of the best documents I've seen in a very long time. And it's a journey. So are we all going to be ready on day one? Well, where's the definition of readiness? But certainly to be able to tick off every one of those those major items, I think, would give an indication of readiness. But I do think the mature organizations out there, the people that have actually adopted good systems practices, they will be ready. I think others are sort of earlier on the journey, and I think I hope that talks like this elicit a little bit of fire in people who aren't ready, so that we can actually get to that point.
Radesh, I'm just busy looking at the poll here that people are busy answering. The majority of people saying that training will be done and a policy will be in place. There are some concerning ones around what is Joint Standard 2 and some saying nowhere near. Let's be real here. It was a popular question in the chat line. How far do retirement funds need to be by the 1st of June? And what if they're not ready? And if you could briefly explain, is there a higher standard of compliance set for service providers as commercial entities?
Natalie, the joint standard, the implementation date or effective date of implementation is 1st June 2025. We all know we may not like it, but that is what has been set. There are no sections of the joint standard that have been delayed, etc. We know as well that what the Conduct Authority and Prudential Authority do if they want to implement any standard is that they may give later dates for implementation of certain sections of a standard. They haven't done so for this joint standard. So that 1 June 2025 date, rather than trying to fight it, is there, and it's implementation of the entire joint standard by that date, by those listed financial institutions that include pension funds and their administrators, and covers most service providers to our funds as well. So those entities, those third-party entities, also need to be compliant by that date. So I've seen questions about, and unfortunately, it's grapevine type things, that if my administrator has everything in place and tells me, and I send a letter to them confirming they have everything in place, that is fine. No, it is not. Pension funds are defined as financial institutions, and the minimum requirements in that joint standard must be complied with by pension funds as well. Insurance, no, that might be a mitigation factor in the sense of limiting your financial loss, but it doesn't mean that if you have only insurance in place, somehow you've complied with the joint standard.
Sure.
Not so. So let's be reasonable about these things and understand and accept that funds have to be fully compliant by 1 June 2025. As I mentioned in the chat, frameworks, etc., should be placed, and then as a base evaluation point, as soon thereafter as possible, there should be that audit of systems, etc., and that report from the IT or experts. Importantly, what Elmarie spoke about, this fits into the overall risk management profile of any retirement fund that should have that in place. This is one aspect that fits into the overall picture. And secondly, there's proportionality built into this joint standard. So, for example, with your service provider, with your administrator, there's reference in this joint standard to some basic things. And I just want to highlight this to the audience, that they need to settle with their service providers on things like RPO, which is the recovery point objective. How much of data are you as a fund willing to lose? And they need to settle with their administrator and other service providers on the RTO, recovery time objective. How far back or how much of disruption are you willing to accept? How many days of disruption are you willing to accept from your service provider? And I see a question about, is this more fees that funds need to pay? Bear in mind, if a service provider, if an administrator system is down and they're not servicing you as a fund, your SLA with that administrator should be amended to say, for as long as you're not providing me with a service, I'm not paying you. It cuts
an interesting
both ways.
perspective. It's an interesting perspective, Radesh.
We must
And
not be afraid to write these things in our contracts and claim these things back, because all we hear is additional fees. There are ways actually of remediating those increased fees. And those are the ways you keep for-profit organizations like administrators, insurance companies, etc., in check by ensuring that they know there are financial implications to their non-compliance.
Thank you. And I wonder, you've given us a great segue into a conversation that we've already launched a poll on, and that is the kind of universe of service providers. And Al-Marie, I'd love to get your perspective on this. From a best practice point of view, do trustees need to evaluate all their service providers? And I mean, let's just talk about some conflicts here. How is there a conflict where an organization or a consulting organization prepares a checklist or an assessment for the administrator who is in fact part of that same organization?
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. I think we're trying to find some ways around the standard and how to implement that. In terms of the supply chain, in terms of the service provider, is again, I want to take it back to the essence of the standard is about risk management. So are you going to, you have to, according to the standard, assess the risks at your service providers, not just at number 1 and number 2, but number 70 and 71 as well. And because if we look globally, when pension funds are breached, is mainly via the supply chain. How can you say, but I'm just going to assess, 10 of my 70 suppliers here, because where's the breach possibly going to be? If I'm an attacker from a criminal perspective, and I know, okay, but your major service providers, normally they will have security controls in place. But I will shop down the line to see, okay, but where is this pension fund data going? Where?
Okay, we seem to have lost Dr. Al-Marie Bierman there. Can everybody else hear me? Oh, there we go. Okay, we'll get her back and carry on that conversation. The one aspect is around the training. And Spa, I wonder if you could maybe jump in here. So we know that training needs to be done. And to me, training involves both the trustees and the fund and then various service providers. Spa, from your point of view, how have you made sure that your administrators are trained on the joint standard?
Okay, thank you. I think we've looked at training in different aspects. So we're doing a couple of things. We've done the targeted training, first of all. So that allowed us to just look at the different people from different levels. So for an example, we've done the briefing for the executives and the boards. This is now the boards, and and the reason why that it makes sense to do the briefing for them is simply because most of them are familiar with cybersecurity and they've been involved in conversation. They know what it means, so they don't need necessarily as intense training as your operational team will need. So we've done something different for operational teams, which is more details with more examples. And we are doing a lot of awareness campaign. And then secondly, we're bringing in something which I think is more important, the cross-functional collaborations between businesses. And the reason why this becomes important is because this is no longer an issue of an IT department, right? So you want to make sure that the entire organization is brought into the conversation. So we're bringing in the compliance task team, which include HR, compliance, legal, IT, operations people. It's important that everyone is familiar with what it means. Everyone is familiar with the responsibility, but mostly bring the senior people because it's always been the responsibility of IT. And now you want to bring it into the overall risk management of the business. And we're also doing some stuff around like the simulation and scenario-based training, which allows people who are working in departments that has nothing to do with cybersecurity, or which they feel that actually their department don't deal with any data that can be breached. So therefore the topic is not that familiar to them. So they can learn much better with the scenario-based and in the scenario-based environment. But most importantly is what we're doing for the people that we're bringing into the organization. Those new starters who are coming into the organization know nothing about cybersecurity, and integrating the onboarding process and making sure that actually the discussion starts from when someone walks into the doors. I think when it comes to the training for the trustees, I mean, it goes back to your question earlier on around, is it not conflicting when the consulting from the same organization is drafting the checklist? I mean, the industry has its own way around who does what for the funds. And I think for the funds where we are actually consultant, actually we've done already the framework and the checklist, which have seen by the board of trustees. And also we've also done some programs around of assisting the board of trustees with what they need to actually do. Because Rakesh is right, the responsibility does not only end with administrators, but there is a huge responsibility on the board of trustees as well. So, and we're also aware that in some instances, they have not been familiar with this because this has not been mandated to them as the task that they need to fulfill. So we've done a lot of work around that, how the training for the trustees, and also just like working with them in terms of how do you break down the requirements and what is expected of them and what is expected from the service providers that they're dealing with. And then also lean on the external support where necessary. I think one should not be naive in thinking that everyone is going to be ready. There's going to have to be, in order to have a true reflection of what your system is capable of and the gaps, you might have to go to external people actually and let them do the full assessment of your system. And we've done that as well. And then some training that we're covering is it's coming from the feedback that we got from them.
I was going to hop to Fiona's question, but I see Elmarie's having some issues still. So I do want to talk maybe to Spa, if you could look at Leon's question, or if I wonder if I could make this live anyway. Leon in the chat bar asks that surely the level of training for trustees around, oh, here we go, thank you. Surely the level of training for trustees around governance is different to the level of training for staff or operational people at the various service providers. Fergus, do you perhaps have a view on this?
I think the training it's of a huge sort of spectrum, and I think that's the key thing. Is it's around how we mitigate risk, how better we ask questions, how we engage with audit companies, how we engage with certification agencies, and the training is at several different levels, whether it be training from a trustee level or an employer level. I think it is around the risk management. So it's around what risks an organization and the framework that is implemented in an organization, and the training that is required around the risks that are associated with every role and responsibility within an organization. I know I'm opening it up, but that's how I see it. I see it that it's just not a training to trustees necessarily. I think it's training all over, and I think that potentially is lacking at this point in time.
Thanks, and talks to Spa's comments that he did make around the training, and I love the perspective around the whole organization, HR people, etc. Because as Fergus rightly said, you can bake security into the system, but it's actually people that are going to be the problem. And so the more awareness we have, the better. I want to loop back to Dr. Almarie, because she is back on screen and with us. And if we could perhaps look at this conversation that we started before we lost her, and it was around the risk-based assessments of service providers. And Fiona asks, which service providers should we be focusing on?
Yes, apologies for that. I was under a cyber attack here, it seems. So I really don't know what's happening. It's just kicking me out the whole time. So okay, now I have to get my thoughts in a row. In terms of the risk assessment on your service providers, looking at your service providers is and this is where your categorization come in of your data and what your service provider is providing. So if you have a service provider that is just looking after the fridges, then of course there's no data and there's no money, and the risk associated with that will be none. Okay, so but those service providers that do have the sensitive data, that do work with the client data, that do work with the money and the investments and etc. Of course, they have a higher rating. So if you look at your service provider register, then in that register is of course associating that with, but these are my in terms of the categories of service providers. Then you will have to categorize those as well, because that will lead into your risk register. So it's not just, and I think the big problem here is that in terms of these service providers, it's not just sending a questionnaire and say, okay, but are you doing the following? Because it's quite easy to say yes. I do have an information security policy, and I do have that in place. But the actual proof, what lies in the pudding is what can you provide as evidence? And I think, Radesh, you mentioned that when you started the discussion here. It's not just about the policy, but it's the implementation there. And if we can link that with, and there's a number of things that were mentioned in terms of the training. Yes, training is essential, but not just training, but moving into, I think, more education, because we tend to see training. Okay, we give you a 2-hour training, and now you're on it. Now you understand the standard, and you can implement that. But what the board of trustees need to be trained on, of course, that's the difference between, but what my clients, because I think my clients are totally insecure, and what my service providers are. So there needs to be different levels, but it needs to be continuous. It's like a child, continuously you have to tell him, don't touch that, don't touch that. And just suddenly, after you've done that for the 100th time, they will immediately say, okay, I won't be doing that. So we need to really build a security awareness culture. And we don't have that. We don't have that in the physical space either. So, so that connection between cyber and physical also have an impact there. And then the last thing, because before I will stop rambling. Yeah, is what mentioned in terms of incident response. And I think that is a big thing. It's just, what are you going to do, and what do you have in place? And in terms of your service providers, when do they need to inform you that something happened their side? Where is that stipulated? Do you have that? Do you know what's going on there? Do you know, but what is your obligations in terms of where you are at? Whether you're the administrator, whether you're in the board of trustees, whether you are a service provider. okay, what do you need to do? And I really want to urge, I think, everyone to say, because it was worrisome that some of you in the poll indicated that they don't know what the JS2 is. It's really to just start downloading, okay, but here's the standard. So let me just start reading the standard. Yes, there will be terminology that maybe you're not familiar with, but just start reading it. Maybe put it in chat GPT to give you a summary, but you know what, just start by reading the standard and familiarize yourself with what you need to do. I think I missed a few points, but
it's fine. If I could jump in there and maybe offer some practical insights. So some of the boards that I've been speaking to and some of the service providers in the industry are kind of talking to, much like what you were saying, a tiering approach of service providers. So what I mean by that is, you know, those service providers who have hands-on money and hands-on data, we say, for example, make them tier 1, and they would have different questions or different assessment metrics than, you know, a service provider. And I'm trying frantically to think of one who perhaps doesn't have their hands on a lot of money and a lot of data, but perhaps maybe an auditor. You know, they're auditing processes rather than actually physically touching money and data. You know, so I'm sensing a kind of move towards tiering service providers and assessing them on I mean, the service standard uses the word proportionality, on a proportionality basis. Anne-Marie, would that be a reasonable approach for a board?
Yes. I would really move towards, you know what, whether you have a tiering approach or whether you classify them according to specifics, but because that will ease, and I think it comes down to, remember in Popia, there was a record of processing activity that the companies should have done. Okay, so if they've done that, then you can say, okay, but if I take that on a basis level and I draw a picture of how does the data flow between the service providers and between from the pension fund and the administrator, is that record of processing activity gives you an idea. Okay, but here I have this personal data, or here I have money, or here I have sensitive data that is moving to that service provider, and then immediately you know, okay, but now there's certain controls that need to be in place for that communication and for that service provider, and immediately that's a higher tier. So you already must have, I think, that register of service providers, and if you look at your record of processing activity, then the information is already there. And it's quite easily to put them into tiers and to say, okay, but the one down there that's just doing the marketing, no, you know, it's not really a high level one. So there will be different questions asked there.
That's such a great, I think, comfort for a board. And perhaps there's some people on the call today who are panicking around the kind of extent of this work that they think they need to be doing, and tiering service providers is probably a wise thing to do at this point. I'm going to launch into poll number 3 for our audience today to see what the feeling is out there. Do they feel they're getting sufficient support from their consultant and advisor? And while they're asking that, I'm going to bat a question or answering that, I should say. I'm going to bat a question to Radesh. Worst case scenario, 1 June comes around and our service providers are not up to scratch. What do we do about that? I mean, are we talking about terminating service providers here?
Well, this is part of, and we spoke about this, Natalie, the overall risk management approach of every fund in this country. And that risk management approach is usually a traffic light robot type approach, green, amber, red. And that's the approach that ought to be adopted. What's the nature of the non-compliance? How serious, significant is it? And you then risk management them on that basis. Obviously, you're looking at amber to start with, and depending on seriousness, red for that service provider. With regards to pension funds, if it is not ready by 1 June 2025, again, there's a system in place. It applies for an extension to the FSCA in order to comply. You must remember, its new market conduct regime, contrary to what it was before, exemptions or extensions aren't just automatically granted. There must be good reasons provided, etc. So there is that last resort option for fund as well. Thanks.
So really an iterative process that we're discussing here, right? You have your policy and your framework. You then do your assessments of your service providers, and you may be tiering them depending on their involvement with data and cash. We're obviously doing some training, and then there's the ongoing monitoring, which then feeds back into your framework and policy and risk mitigations. So really an iterative process. And I guess we'll wait for the first incident to see who got it the most right or the most wrong. I mean, at some point we are going to have to deal with something like that. It's time to wrap up, and I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to answer a question which was kind of asked in the chat, just a little bit reframed or a little bit from a different perspective. Let's start with SPA. What, in your opinion, should trustees prioritize between now and the 1st of June?
Yeah, thank you. I think we all know that between now and the 1st of June is already too late if you haven't done anything. But I think there's a serious need here that they need to assess. They need to assess their service providers. Their trustees, most of their data flow from the employer all the way to their fund administrator. There is an investment manager involved. There is just too many stakeholders that they need to assess their readiness and their data and categorize and make sure that the fund has its own risk register that take into account the readiness of all these stakeholders and service providers that they need to be dealing with. If that hasn't been done, then it's something that I will prioritize. And then engage with people, engage with all the stakeholders, because to Radesh's point, and Elmar report mentioned the same thing as well, is that it's not a matter of asking the question, are you ready or not ready? You're going to have to sit down, engage, go through the due diligence process where you can see what has been put in place, what is the gap, what is the plan to close all of those gaps. Because a lot of people are going to come up with a gap of some sort, and you just want to be in a position whereby you've done your full assessment of that, and as a fund, as a trustee and the board, you fully understand what does that mean and how does that expose your members of the fund. And some boards also need to accept the fact that they might not be in a position to actually do all of that work. So they need to ask for help. And what does that look like for them? Because as a board, you might have to find someone external to actually run this process for you and put you in a position where you're comfortable and you're compliant. So I've sat in many boards whereby it's clear that the understanding is not there. And in those instances, you need to bring someone who can fully understand and actually just be in a position to make sure that the requirements are met. The responsibility with the boards and senior management is not going to go away. It's not going to go away because your stakeholders are ready or unready. So you're going to have to do your own work in making sure that you're satisfied with that. But I would just say assess, engage, and ask for help if you need to ask for help. Thanks.
Thanks, Spa. Radesh, in 30 seconds, I want to get your opinion on the poll results. I'm going to wrap it in there, where we asked whether the people on the call felt that they were getting sufficient support from their advisor or consultant. Worrying me, around a quarter of our respondents said they're not. And Spa has mentioned it. Are there providers that trustees can get hold of at this point to kind of increase the levels of comfort around compliance?
Yes, absolutely. They can speak to you, Natalie, or to Leon in that regard. But reality is these things need to be done. I think other reality is, as Spa said, and you said, these are new. This is a new development for retirement funds, especially. Might not be for some other financial institutions, but for us, it's relatively new. So get professional advice, get it done properly. Don't go for cheap and nasties. It's not about that. It's about doing things right. sorry, Natalie, I must just answer one question that came up in the chat. It's not the case that retirement funds have very few cyber incidents. In fact, it's the opposite. There've been several already in this country. Just because it hasn't been reported on in the media doesn't mean it hasn't occurred. So please don't go under that misconception that we're somehow on the southern tip of Africa and we're immune to these things. The contrary actually is true. We regularly have are at the top of the list or near the top of the list for cyber incidents. So please don't harbor that misconception. Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you. Almarie, your question or your thing that you think trustees should be prioritizing in the next, let's call it 6 weeks.
I think start with your cybersecurity strategy and a formal implementation plan. If you don't know what you should do from the start, and pick the low-hanging fruit. You know what, you already have things in place. So start there, and then you can build it out, at least to show that, there's a proper plan, and it's going to take time. Yes, it is. But that's where I will start. Again, hope is not a strategy. You need something formal, written or faxed or whatever.
Hope is not a strategy.
Yeah.
I love that. And I also loved Fergus's comment around the security being baked into the process and systems. And as our sponsor for today, Fergus, I'm going to let MIP have the last word. Your thoughts on what trustees should be prioritizing?
So Natalie, I think the priority needs to be, I think it's called materiality. I think you called it tiering earlier. And I think the materiality of business partners, providers, third parties, contractors, whatever we want to call them, I think we need to assess the materiality of the risks that they potentially pose to businesses and the services that they provide to the schemes. I think that's important. And then there's the assessment of what they do, how they do it. Okay. We can ask a simple question that says, can you give us assurance that you are compliant? And they can answer yes, with absolutely no proof whatsoever. So I would say to schemes and trustees, focus on what you know. Focus. You would be surprised how much you've actually got. Okay, we did this as a business, and we became ISO certified. And we had so much in place, but we just needed to structure it better so that we could outwardly get audited, we were compliant, we could report, etc. We had lots of the processes. In fact, probably 90% of the processes. So I think you'd be surprised. To the trustees, my advice is assess where you are. I think you're further than you should be. But importantly, where you have material engagements with business partners and solution providers, make sure that there is some type of certification governance around what they do and how they do deliver to you, because it's very difficult for you to ask questions that you don't know the answers to, or the ongoing questions. We need to ask questions better. And certification agencies, etc., are very, very good at asking those questions on behalf of people who utilize software providers, business partners, or whatever the case may be. So my single piece of advice is engage with people that have got certification by third-party bodies, and focus on the 20% that's going to take care of the 80%. Materiality is the most important thing. Cybersecurity is not an on and off. It's a process. And your posture needs to keep on being updated over time. That's all I could offer to the trustees.
Such a great perspective, the comment around you are more ready than you think you are. And certainly having chatted to yourself, Fergus, and the other people on the call today, I am a lot less panicked than I was at 9 a.m. today, because I kind of like this perspective that service providers do have things in place already. It's just a case of putting together the frameworks and, like Fergus says, asking the right questions. So that's an excellent point to finish on. So as we wrap up, I'd like to thank everybody for attending today. We've run out of time, unfortunately. We have made a note of the questions, and we will be answering some of those on EBnet in the coming weeks. But thank you to everybody for joining, particularly our panelists. Thank you for your time and for sharing your expertise and experience with us today. And thank you very much to our sponsor, MIP, for today's session. Really, we don't charge people who attend our sessions anything to hear this kind of expert advice and guidance. And so all we ask of our audience today is that they subscribe to our daily newsletter, where you'll carry on getting great advice and insights and news like this, as well as follow us on our EBnet and EBnet Stream LinkedIn pages. And we'll keep you up to date with this conversation and others as they unfold. So thank you very much for that. Our comment and commitment to you is that we'll keep bringing you quality content, relevant content before the deadline dates. And our next webinar, speaking of that, our next webinar is on the 13th of May, where we'll be looking at the issue of ethics and AI, which I'm looking forward to. So thank you very much to everybody on the call, our panelists. And until the next time we see each other, thank you very much.